Hello and welcome to the Emotion of Work podcast, where we take a deep dive into the human condition. Now, flexible working is a topic that is seems to be in the news every single day at the moment, whether it be on the newspapers or elsewhere. But flexible working is just such a big topic, and one that is filled with emotion. And that emotion could be the ease and relief it can bring to some, or maybe the suspicion and the scrutiny that it can bring for others. And there's also a risk that by talking about flexible working, it might exclude those whose role or job isn't possible to be done in a flexible way. And at the same time, I'm going to run that risk because today's guest, I think, is really interesting in that they're looking to challenge or to reframe the narrative that sits around flexible working. And as regular listeners of this podcast will know, doing that from a perspective of data and research is right up my street. So my guest today is a researcher, a practitioner, and a senior lecturer at Manchester. Let me try that one again. My guest today is a researcher, practitioner, and senior lecturer at the Manchester Metropolitan University, and I'm very, very glad that she's joining me today. So let's get our guest on the air, which is Dr. Krystal Wilkinson. Hi, Krystal.
Hi there. Thanks a lot for having me. Thank
you so much for coming on. I'm delighted to have you on as a guest, and I've really enjoyed our off-air kind of conversation to get the frame and everything set up. So I'm really, really excited about today.
Me too.
Now, good. That's good to hear. Now, we're recording this podcast in January, and as per usual, we will open with an unexpected yet innocuous question. So my unexpected yet innocuous question for you is New Year's resolutions. What do you think?
Yeah, I really don't want to do them anymore. So in the past, I have made them often and often failed.
Okay.
So I'm much of the opinion now that if you want to change something up, do it on the day that you want to change it up. Don't put the pressure on yourself to have to make a big change just because it's the start of a new year.
Just because it's the start of the year. So there's a lady who I follow on Twitter called Fiona McBride, and she put out a post around intentions and talking about the intent, sort of what are your intentions for not necessarily for a year, but what are your intentions for a day, a week, a month, those things. So not resolutions per se, but more intentions. And my wife and I get together at the start of each year and we say, right, what are our intentions for this year? So sometimes they're kind of boring stuff like hang curtains in the office or lay grass seed on this particular part of the garden, and sometimes they're a bit more exciting. But yeah, I like the idea of intentions rather than resolutions.
Yeah, I like it.
Well, I think in the workplace there must be like a lot of pressure as well around January time to make changes. Kind of that with that classic New Year, New Start thing.
Yeah.
And flexible working, I guess, I don't know, for a lot of workplaces, from what I read and from talking to my clients, flexible working is high on that list of things that they know they want to look at, but they're not necessarily, I guess, sure how to go about it. And I think that one of the challenges that I really enjoyed about reading when I was reading some of your work was about the idea of work-life challenges or work-life dilemmas, rather than kind of work-life balance or flexible working being something that is only for those that might be parents or carers or those things. So yeah, I just wondered what made you choose that frame around work-life challenges or work-life dilemmas. Try and put my tooth back in. Work-life dilemmas.
Yeah, well, so the research was from my PhD, but when we were writing kind of some of the academic outputs from it, they always want to obviously know the contribution to theory, and the work-life balance literature. When it's talking about problems with the work-life balance, it's usually talking about work-life conflict, and work-life conflict is actually fairly narrowly defined in the literature as kind of time-based conflict or strain-based conflict. And yeah, although the concept is work-life, the concept is work-life conflict and work-life balance. Quite often it is taken to be work-family conflict or work-family balance.
Okay.
So what we found in our, or what I found in my interviews that we then went on to write the paper based on, was that people who don't fit the narrow definition of family that they think the work-life balance stuff is for, which is usually very, very young children and occasionally elder relatives if you're a carer, or if you've got somebody who's got a disability and you're a carer, they just don't think they're entitled to take part in it. So the work-life challenge that we identified was kind of when to assert your desire for any kind of work-life balance, you've got to challenge normative assumptions in the organisation about who actually does need support and who qualifies for support and who's entitled to support. And then the dilemmas was like the internal dilemmas, the internal discussions that you might have about investing in those different domains. So for the particular sample that we were looking at, or I was looking at in my PhD research, it was young managers and professionals. And so there was sort of like an internal dilemma about, well, how much do I push for time off for my work-life balance versus how much do I work all the hours because it might progress my career? And while I haven't got children, should I take advantage of not having children to really push on the career front? So it's just kind of extending the conversation a little bit to cover more people in the workforce. And I've kind of carried on with that interest really in further research that I've done. So I'm looking at complex fertility journeys at the moment, and there's kind of two different ways that factors in, because people going through fertility treatment, they do have those time conflicts that people have who have children. You know, if you're having to go to fertility clinics often and you're having to do lots of kind of research around your specific condition and the specific treatments, there's a lot of kind of logistical work that's involved in that, which does take time. So you do have the time-based work-life conflict, but you also don't have that sense of entitlement and that legitimacy, because quite often there's not any policies around fertility treatment, or it's very limited what support there is. So I think the notion of these kind of challenges and dilemmas does kind of carry through as well, and the idea of, if I disclose that I'm having fertility treatment, do then people assume that I'm not interested in career development anymore, and kind of discount me from things? So yeah, just useful concepts, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Oh, there is so much in there I want to ask about. Okay, so you said that commonly in the literature it's framed as so work-life balance is framed I really need to put my teeth back in today. So you said that within the research, work-life balance is seen as a conflict, and it's a conflict of time, and then there's like is it an implication? Is it an implicit assumption that it's about families and caring either for young children or potentially elder relatives, or is it an explicit thing, would you say?
I think it's difficult. So a lot of the policies that we have for flexible working, for example, being the obvious one, the origins in legislation was a work-family thing. So initially, the right to request flexible working was for if you were a parent or a carer, and then only later was it extended to anybody. And I think, if we think about other maternity protections and other benefits and time off that you get related to family, I think there's quite often normative assumptions in organisations that this flexible working, flexible working, family-friendly provisions, that it's for a certain demographic group. And the literature is just that the origins of the work-life balance come from kind of work-family balance. So, and a lot of the studies, they focus on working parents. As, it's much rarer that you'll have other groups specifically of the focus, or if there are a mixed sample, it's usually the parental challenges or the caring challenges that are kind of foreground in the discussions. So we just did a replication of my PhD study basically in the pandemic context, but looking specifically at people who were transitioning to home working, so the people that live alone and now they're home working, to talk about their kind of work-life interface. And quite often, the literature on the work-life interface, it was talking about, everything was about homeschooling. and having very young children and the challenges for working parents. And I absolutely think it's right that we do have that focus, because absolutely these people have huge challenges to overcome, but it's this idea that we don't just completely overlook everybody else as well, and that there might be different challenges for different groups. And quite often I think when we spoke to people about kind of like special leave that was in their organisations for working parents, they were supportive of that, but they were like, but what people need to be aware of is if you're taking work off one group, somebody else has to pick it up unless that workload is reduced. So they didn't think it was anything malicious, anything intentional. It's just, what about us?
Okay. So can I unpick some of the different terminology that we've played with so far then? So we had work-life balance then, which is often framed as work-life conflicts, which is, you said, to do with time or strain.
Well, yeah, I mean, so they're kind of the opposite. So everyone wants to have a work-life balance, and a useful definition of work-life balance is an individual having sufficient control and autonomy over when, where, how they work to enable them to fulfil their responsibilities inside and outside work. So that's a quote that I've used before from Visser and Williams in 2006.
Okay. So hang on, sorry, can we do that one again? Because I thought that was really nicely done.
Okay.
So work-life balance, according to that 2007 paper was?
Work-life balance, according to Visser and Williams in 2006, is an individual. 2006, yeah. An individual has sufficient control and autonomy over when, where, and how they work to enable them to fulfil their responsibilities both inside and outside paid work. So that's work-life balance. So work-life conflict is when you don't have that. So if you haven't got sufficient control, you haven't got autonomy, and basically you can't fulfil your responsibilities inside and outside of work. So there's a conflict there. So that's what the work-life conflict is. And usually they're talking about work conflicting with family. So the time in work is taking away time that you could be with your family. Or strain. It's something to talk about strain. So if you're stressed, if you're worried, if there's issues at home, and that can take away emotional bandwidth that you could be devoting to your family and stuff. So and they talk about spillover sometimes, so you can have negative spillover. So if you're stressed at work, if you're worried, you're stressing and you're worried at home as well.
Okay, all right. And I guess, and maybe this is why you've chosen that definition, but what I really like about that definition is it's agnostic of your situation.
Yeah, it's just
No, go on.
No, I was just saying, it's just that quite often it's in the way it's applied in research is that it's not. But yeah, that definition would be applicable to anybody in any situation.
Okay. So that's work-life balance and work-life conflicts then.
Is that the rhetoric?
So,
I keep talking.
So go on.
I'm just thinking it's the rhetoric and the reality, isn't it? So the rhetoric, the idea behind this is that, but in reality, quite often policies and line managers and even individuals are not thinking it's that definition. They're thinking it's about people balancing work with family. So if I haven't got a family, then I haven't got any entitlement to it.
No, I agree completely, and I like the. I want to come back to legitimacy later. I know you were talking about that in terms of the work that you've been doing on complex fertility journeys, but legitimacy and disclosure, I thought, were two areas that I'd love to come back and look at a little bit more. Whether that be, we can talk specifically about the work that you've been doing more recently. And then I might want to, if we can, see if we can broaden those two ideas of legitimacy and disclosure out to potentially other circumstances or contexts as well.
Yeah.
So when you talk about work-life challenges and dilemmas, then, so you describe the dilemmas bit being the dilemmas that line managers may face in an organisation when deciding or weighing up either the granting or the denial of an approach to flexible working. Is that right?
Not quite. I mean, when I was talking about work-life challenges and dilemmas, the dilemmas I was talking about was like the internal dilemmas of an employee about, how much time do I invest in different domains? Because for example, if people are really going to push for work-life balance, then they're potentially going to take less time, to dedicate less time to their work. So we were talking about young professionals who were sort of saying, I think it's kind of unfair in a way that I have to pick up all the Christmases and all the holidays, and I have to work late because the working mums, people with children, they get to go. But on the flip side, they're probably not going to get promoted because they're not putting in as all the hours that I am. So there's kind of some dilemmas there around.
Okay.
Around, I suppose, the universal assumption that everybody always wants work-life balance, maybe. Which, depending on your career stage, it might be more or less important to you relative to other employee benefits, including training and development, and so on.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's coming up quite a bit now with the whole flexibility stigma argument. That if it's a case of particular people are perceived as being less dedicated to the jobs because they're working from home, for example, or something, then are you going to have people sort of facing these dilemmas, these internal dilemmas about their time investment is one, but also like where they work or I'm just fluffing on this. Sorry.
No, not at all. No, what you're saying is making me really think. So it's fantastic, and so those dilemmas then are dilemmas that all the different parties in a flexible working approach may need to ponder.
Yeah.
Whether that be the dilemma for the individual around what might this say about me, or how might this be viewed, or what might the impact be on my, how I'm viewed, my credibility, my future career opportunities, my development, those things. But there's also dilemmas, I guess, for the line managers around do I trust that they'll still get the job done? Will they still perform at the required level? Will they be washing homes under the hammer all day? So there's dilemmas there for the managers, but I guess there's also dilemmas for the organisations. So, like, do we trust that people can do that? Do we have the right infrastructure in place? Can we keep our information secure and safe if we've got people working in different ways, remote ways or flexible ways, or going to coffee shops and working from there? Is that going to keep our data safe and secure? So there's dilemmas for a number of different aspects, I suppose. That's what I'm thinking anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's got huge opportunities. All of the flexible working, and a lot of the issues that we're kind of coming up against in the complex fertility journeys project, particularly. Is if you're giving people more flexibility, they have, it's exactly that quote from Visser and Williams. It's the control and autonomy over when, where, and how you work. So if everybody has a degree of flexibility, then you don't need a special reason. You don't need legislative protection. You to be able to kind of fit in a variety of different non-work challenges or things that you've got going on. So kind of part of me is thinking that if everybody is given flexibility, then it's more beneficial for kind of people who are going through particular issues that maybe there's not existing employment protection for, but also the people that are potentially going to have to cover for them, they feel that it's fair because they're getting to do the same.
Yeah, no. So it got me thinking about, and at the risk of doing a shameless self-promotion style plug. So I remember my team at the moment is going through a process of buying their first house, so there was a particular day where there was a flurry of activity, and not much work was done that day, and so they suggested working extra hours to cover for that, to make up for the time that was lost. And I said, well, as long as you achieve what you need to achieve and get done what you need to get done, then I don't expect that to happen. And also, kind of buying a house is not once in a lifetime. That's a bit much, but for that one day you've been sorting out some really important life things, then that's okay, and go and sort out your really important life things because they need sorting out. And I can cover off whatever you needed to get done today if they're for the urgent or important or deadline based things. And that's and that for me was quite an easy decision to make. But I'm conscious that I'm probably coming at that from a slight place of privilege in that we work 100% remotely already. A lot of the work we do doesn't require being physically somewhere or in a particular place. And maybe because my team is relatively small, it also affords me a bit of privilege or luxury in that way as well. But I feel like I'm rambling now, sorry.
No, it makes me think of this concept of rhythm intelligence that I've been kind of playing around with recently. So I first read about rhythm intelligence in an article on maternity management in SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprises, that some colleagues of mine wrote at the Centre for Decent Work and Productivity at Manchester Met Uni. So it's Julia Rouse and colleagues. And they were talking about how managers who have an awareness of the different rhythms, so the rhythms of work, but also the non-work rhythms of their employees, and are actually kind of tuned into thinking about the adjustments to the job that might be needed, which for some it might be quite small or quite temporary. And this idea that if we co-create some solutions, then people are going to be more productive, they're going to be more engaged in the long run. That quite often when I think about some of the family-friendly stuff and the right to request flexible working, you're thinking about these massive big adjustments. So someone's going on maternity leave for a year, or somebody's a permanent change to part-time working or to annual hours or something that's this one-off event. And when we think about like accommodating disability, you talk about like reasonable adjustments. We'll make reasonable adjustments to the job, which might for a long, considerable period of time. But quite often with this notion of kind of rhythm intelligence, it's just about thinking about there's a certain days for everyone when they're going to be a little bit less productive, or a period of time. It's something like fertility treatment. It might just be one cycle of treatment where somebody's going to be their performance might be quite compromised, or it might not, depending on how they react to the medications and other factors. But just for a specific period of time. And it's similar if there's if someone's grieving, or if somebody's getting a divorce, or something that might be a period of time. But if you get into this idea of thinking that we'll support people with these fluctuations in their non-work life, make a bit of accommodation where we can, then we can keep these people, and they'll probably be more engaged because they'll feel like they've been treated well and supported, and they're not kind of othered. They're not this kind of problem, because if your whole team are aware that, well, if I get divorced or if I become unwell, they're likely to treat me in the same way, then it might overcome some of those issues of us versus them. Why are the parents getting all the support and I'm not? Why am I always be the one that has to pick up the slack, or feeling that only certain groups of people have protection because it's linked to legislation?
So what would be good, if it's okay, could you share with me a link to either the paper or papers that you mentioned around rhythm intelligence, because I think that'd be really useful to put some links into the show notes for those, if that's okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was wondering was, so on one hand it could be quite easy to say that so I'm thinking of the outcomes and the results that you were discussing briefly just then, around things like people being more engaged, they're more likely to stick around, giving that compassion and support through that period of where the rhythm's interrupted to when the rhythm then comes back again, or maybe return to more of a normal cadence or a normal rhythm. That it could lead to these outcomes at an either at an individual productivity or organisational level. And is there any research, or does the research support that? Are there any findings that support that doing things like paying more attention to things like rhythm intelligence and or broadening the definition or the view of flexible working from familial or caring based frames to just much broader, does that lead to those kind of outcomes, or what research is there to suggest that it does lead to some of those outcomes at an individual or organisational level?
I can't point to many kind of papers that I've read on this. I mean, the rhythm intelligence paper that's kind of been the background of my thinking was only published last year.
Okay.
But I mean, we interviewed 80 men and women on our complex fertilities journey, and you could actually, absolutely see within those. And we did biographical narrative interviewing. So basically, the interviews started with just tell me your story of how your fertility journey has been navigated alongside your work, and people just told us their stories, and the amount of people that talked about there was no policy, there was no support, I didn't feel able to tell my manager, how they then tried to navigate it on their own, or how they struggled to navigate it on their own and it ended up with lots of sick leave, going part-time, leaving the job, changing the focus of their career. So some people in academia, for example, said I can't do research, I'm just going to have to move to a different bit of the job. So in terms of kind of the impact of not being supported on their careers, their commitment to their employer, the psychological contract stuff, days off, all of the kind of markers that we would say about a business case for supporting something in terms of absenteeism, presenteeism, leaving the job, going part-time, productivity, we could absolutely see in these narratives. And the to a lesser extent, we did have examples of people who were well supported, and it's this idea of like temporary reasonable adjustments. So these were what I would say rhythm intelligent managers. These were people who were saying, right, I don't know much about this, I don't know much about fertility treatment. Having discussed it with you, I realise that you don't even really know what to expect, that your body might react quite differently. So I'll come along with you, we'll have some meetings with HR, I'll learn a bit more, tell me what you want to tell me about it, and we'll negotiate it as we go, we'll try things, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. The people that were given extra flexibility. But quite often all this, to have those kind of things, you need people to disclose, and when you've got a organisational context where there's no policy around fertility treatment, there's nothing that says that if I were to disclose, I'd be entitled to anything, or it'd be favourably met with, then it becomes very, very difficult.
I mean, I'm not a big fan of policy anyway, so and I have my own biases to maintain control of, I guess. I
mean, to be honest, for me, in my mind, the ultimate, supportive policy around fertility treatment would be, treat it almost like a disability for a period of time, even if it's just temporary, in that you might have to make reasonable adjustments. And that's because everybody's experience is so different going through this in terms of how many cycles of treatment they might need, whether, their reactions to the medications, what their job was like before and how that intersects. That I think there's quite a lot of interest in fertility policies at the moment, and which is great to see, absolutely great to see. But quite often you see it's like, somebody can have 5 days per cycle or 5 days off per year. And it's like some people don't need days off, they need a bit of flexibility. Some people might just need an adjustment to their workload because the medications that they're on might impact their memory, or for whatever that particular person's experience is. So what you need in a policy basically is just a policy to be there, or there to be some presence on the website, for example, so people think this is something I can talk about at work. This is something where I'm entitled, there's a sense of entitlement, some legitimacy to actually having a conversation with my manager. And in the absence of any legislative protection around this issue, people don't know that. They think I've got no entitlement. There's no legislation, there's no law that says I can have time off. There's no law that says anything. So if there's no policy, then I probably think I'm not entitled to anything. If there is a policy, it's great. But the risk with policies is that they are shutting people down. So they're saying you're entitled to 3 days. So that's it. It's 3 days, when just a discussion with your manager of what you actually need might be a lot more appropriate and supportive. Yeah,
because it can be. I can understand it being a tricky area to navigate, and both around fertility journeys and around other kind of areas as well, because you mentioned grief earlier on, and grief is something that affects so many different people in so many different ways, and often what organisations will have is a particular policy that says if it's a certain classification of individual or certain classification of loss, then that entitles you to so many days, or and I've always really struggled with those things because you just don't know.
Yeah.
It's really hard to, as an organisation, to say if X then Y. If immediate family member then Y days, if distant relative then X day. So I think it's and I what policies do is provide to a certain degree that clarity and that protection, because if you go the other way, which is I don't know, what do I mean by if you go the other way? So the if you go the other way, which is have what you want whenever you want it, then there's no control for the organisation in that either. And I think sometimes it's those ends of spectrums that are played out.
Yeah, I think
rather than somewhere that's kind of more in the middle.
Yeah, I think I was thinking for line managers as well. So what we seem to see in our research certainly was that the really experienced managers that have dealt with a lot of maternities and a lot of bereavements and a lot of people with disabilities and health conditions, they were much more confident at not needing a policy and flexing it and going a bit above and beyond what a policy said, or well, it's obvious I'd just do this even without a policy. But I think sometimes the newer line managers particularly, they really need a policy, because they're not as confident to just make those judgments.
Yeah.
I suppose it's about training as well, though, isn't it? If you've got really, really good line manager training and support, so HR support, so if people want to think, there's a baseline policy here. There might be a baseline fertility policy, for example, that says, you can have a few days off. But if there was a line after that, or more at your discretion, or contact HR for a discussion, for a case-by-case discussion. But obviously then I'm assuming that it's an organisation that has HR, that has lots of policies, and quite often, a lot of people work in small to medium-sized enterprises. We had some people in schools, and I know there's a lady that's running an organisation called Fertility Issues in Teaching that's talking about, this is a huge, largely female-dominated profession that quite often, there isn't much in the way of policies and procedures, or there's HR department often that you can contact. And sometimes it's head teachers having to make these decisions when they're not necessarily got specialist knowledge or training. So what's one thing that we're trying to look at in our research particularly is the range of job contexts that people might be in, and in academia, for example, there's quite a lot of people like PhD students or people on temporary contracts and things where it's like, I've not got one employer, or I've not got it's not even an employment contract. I'm a student, but I'm in my 40s, and I'm it's all the complexities there around not only the specifics of the personal situation that you're trying to navigate, but the specifics of your employment context as well. So I've just done a paper on so shoehorn this one in there. just published a paper on perinatal mental health and employment, which is mental illness in pregnancy and post-birth, and talking about kind of ecological systems theory and rhythms. So the rhythm intelligence stuff is in there, but this idea that our experience isn't just about the workplace micro setting. It's the workplace, but it's also any other micro settings that are important here. So in the fertility study, for example, fertility clinics, the operating hours, their forms of communication, all that's going to have an impact on how you balance your fertility treatment with your work. Sorry, my phone's just gone.
Sorry.
And then, but that's within other levels of the system as well, and the kind of the exo level is where all your regulations are and your industry standards, and you're working within multiple different levels of a system at any one time, and your unique positioning within that, and your own history, and the history of your manager, and the history of your organisation, and the history of your national context in terms of the policies that are available. it all has an impact. So, the right to request flexible working is a key piece of legislation that's, arguably open to anyone. It's not just people with children. It's not just people with children, but you've only got the legislation that is just the right to request, and your employer can turn it down for any number of reasons. And access to provisions, even when you are entitled to them, your manager can block that access, so like blocking a promotion or something. So you're always within multiple different systems that you're trying to navigate at any one time.
Yes, and that's it's hard because it's that systemic bit often that's the really tricky one, and how trying to make it so that those systems can be compatible with each other. So can the clinic's opening hours also line up with the system of the working practices of the organisation, and also line up with the deadlines of work that need to be delivered, and so no, I'm with you. So if I was a listener to this podcast then, and I'm thinking, all right then, Phil, all right then, Crystal, you've talked about these different situations, or the different whether that be the fertility journeys or the non-parental or non-familial or non-caring responsibilities and the individuals in there. We're going to have a look at our flexible working, or we're going to be having a look at our approach to how we go about these areas. What would your advice be?
I think at an organisational level, if you've got the time and the energy to do it, then consulting with your staff. So, employee voice is a huge thing. People are more likely to get on board with things if they've been involved in the design. So understanding the profile of your workforce, maybe, look at the age range, look at other kind of demographic factors for your workforce, and then, try and have a discussion. You could say, we're thinking of introducing or looking at our flexibility policy. What do you think of it already? Do you feel entitled to any element of flexibility? Do you want any element of flexibility? What element of flexibility? Is it? Would it be temporal flexibility, which around the timings of work? Would it be around your location flexibility? Would it be about functional flexibility? That people just want to kind of learn different skills to make their jobs more interesting. And I guess understanding what people want, what their views are of existing policies, whether they think things are fair, whether they feel that their managers are approachable to talk about non-work things. So I suppose if you get a picture of kind of the current perceptions of your workforce, the current needs of your workforce, and then trying to think about what is feasible, for certain, as you mentioned before, certain kind of industries, certain types of jobs, certain types of flexibility might not be possible, but you might be able to do something with something else. Or if things aren't an option, if you actually go back and you explain very clearly why, we've given this some thought, but this is not possible, because people can feel that at least they've had a voice, at least it's been considered, and they've had the opportunity to say. Because I think procedural justice, your kind of sense that it's the way things are the way they are, that you understand the decision making behind that can be more powerful sometimes than actually the outcomes. So I suppose I'd also encourage any individual to kind of think about their own work-life balance, think about their kind of life course. So going back to my PhD research, these kind of issues around people assuming that young managers and professionals without children don't have any non-work time demands, and they were quite often thinking that, I don't want to be single and solo living forever. I want to meet a partner and I want to have a child one day maybe. And how do I meet a partner when I'm working really, really long hours? I can't, I arrange dates and then I can't turn up because it's unpredictable. Or my employer keeps sending me around the country because I'm the person who's, unencumbered by children. So I'm the one that will get sent on jobs. And it's like, so I suppose if you're encouraging people to think about their non-work priorities, where they are on the life course and whether that's likely to change, whether something maybe isn't that important to them now, but it's likely to become. Because one of the issues that we had in with that research is that people genuinely thought they weren't entitled, and they genuinely thought that their needs were less important than other people, because the narratives are there that parents have it harder and parents need the support. So quite often these individuals weren't only not asking for flexibility, but they were offering to work late, they were offering to cover at Christmas sometimes because of this perception that other people had it harder. Some of them, and some people were being expected to be like that, and they didn't think it was fair, but they didn't feel that they could say no. And I guess if an organisation was to ask everybody, there might be some people that quite wanted to work Christmas, or could you pay more for the people who work Christmas so that there's an incentive, or find other ways to make the kind of the overall reward package more attractive. So if people are always taking on extra work, could they have some say in what extra work that is taken on? Could they have some work that they find more challenging as opposed to just more of the stuff they don't like? Can you switch things around, or just take off some non-essential tasks if people are often to cover for other people? I keep feeling like I'm just waffling on.
No, you're not waffling on at all. No apology. No apology needed. Yeah, you keep making me think of different things, which leads me to think that you're not waffling. Because if you were waffling, I wouldn't be. It wouldn't make me think, oh, what about this, and oh, what about that, and oh, what about the other. So one of the things that you've mentioned, I guess, kind of implicitly a couple of times when you talked about disclosure, and also then when you were saying about the importance of consulting and asking people, there's a risk, I guess, to people that we're asking them to be vulnerable. So we're asking them to share what might be going on for them outside of work in terms of their personal priorities in whatever way their personal priorities may be. And in some of your work, you talk about work-based vulnerabilities. And I wondered if you could tell me a bit more about those.
Yeah, well, in the paper that came, one of the papers that came from our PhD, we were talking about kind of, it was particularly, again, the solo living managers and professionals, and this idea that when you haven't got a role as a parent or as a spouse, sometimes your main role in life and your main sense of identity could be through your work. So you might be more vulnerable to some disappointments at work. So if people criticise your work, or if there's you don't get a promotion, or you don't get a particular project, or you get treated negatively, that's kind of your main sense of identity is being attacked. And also you might not have. I mean, this idea of the work-life conflict. There's a set of literature about work-life enrichment, where having one role in life can actually kind of be beneficial to you. You can have skills that you can have in one domain that will be useful in the other domain, but also just having somebody at home that you can vent to, that you can talk about your disappointments at work, put things in perspective, or just stop you dwelling on stuff. So in the pandemic study, these people who live alone who are now home working, quite often they were really worried about the pandemic and living alone, and what if something happened to me and nobody found me, and they're dwelling on that, and that's kind of maybe making them work longer hours, because they're like, well, I need a distraction, so they're working really longer hours, and there's nobody to offload to about their concerns. And then if there is something that's upsetting them at work, and that includes fairness, I feel like I'm picking up and having to work around the people who have got children who have got more flexibility. So I can't do my job because I can't get hold of them, and they're stressing and they're stewing, and they've got nobody to tell at home, and nobody to say, well, it doesn't matter, just have a hug and or feed your child, or whatever it is that might just, although it's a burden, it's a task that you have to do, it diverts your attention to something else. So interesting stuff.
Okay.
I find it interesting anyway.
No, I agree completely, and I think I get fascinated with identity anyway, And both the identities that we choose to take and the identities that are then put on us. And you talk about, I think the example you gave earlier on was brilliant about you don't have any, so therefore you can. You don't have any, insert whatever that is, caring responsibilities, for example, therefore you can travel the country. Which runs the risk of negating any other relationships that individual may hold and value, or activities that individual may hold or value that are based around where they've chosen to live. And then by sending them across the country, they can't play for their football team or join, or go to their club or whatever, see their family or friends or whatever that may be, because they because they don't have familial or caring responsibilities, then they can. Which then goes on to affect things like legitimacy and disclosure, because definitely. So,
and I think you said something really, really important and profound before, which is something that we've certainly been grappling with in our fertility study, particularly, which is about there is a vulnerability in disclosure. So if we're encouraging people that you're only going to get support if you disclose, if you tell us about your fertility treatment, or tell us. Mental health is the big thing. There's people. You have to. Mental health it's an invisible disability. To an extent, if you've got a severe episode of mental illness, it might be visible to other people through your behaviour. But for a lot of it, it's potentially concealable. To get support, you need to tell people about it, and there's huge campaigns to disclose, and it's good to talk and tell. But the statistics and the literature on discrimination based on mental health is considerable. So there is evidence out there that people who disclose might get treated badly, whether they would have got the discrimination anyway because maybe their performance would have dropped. But it is difficult stuff. And with the fertility stuff, a lot of people in our study didn't want to tell the manager because, well, it's private. It's like, well, people don't tell their manager about their sex life to get pregnant, but we kind of have to tell them about our intimate life and that we're having fertility issues. And then I don't want people to ask for updates. I don't want to keep having to explain, oh no, this cycle's failed, or perceptions that you're not interested in your job anymore. And that's been a feature of literature on maternity and work for a while. But with maternity, you're pregnant, it's probably going to be visible at some point, and you're going to have a baby, hopefully, unless something goes horribly wrong. Whereas with fertility treatment, the odds of actually getting a live baby at the end of it are not always as strong as people think. So you're basically disclosing wanting to be a mum and all the perceptions that that come with that in terms of, well, you're not committed to your career and all of that, when you might not even end up with a baby. So it's absolutely it's about what should be in the domain of work and what is private. But if you don't disclose it, then you've got to navigate it yourself, and you've got to find ways to conceal. And there's a really nice paper that I like by a lady called Caroline Gattrell on maternity management in work, and it's secrecy, silence, and super performance. And it's about trying to conceal that you're pregnant when you do disclose, trying to downplay the pregnancy and keep it all controllable so that nobody can say you're less committed to your job, or you're not good at your job. And super performance is people actually feeling like they have to work even harder than they did before, so that people don't think that they're slacking, or so that so it's like there's in terms of emotions, the whole spectrum of emotions that you have to navigate when you choose to disclose or not. And then with something like a fertility journey, you keep having to make those decisions, because it's like, well, do I tell them each new cycle? I could tell, or I could not tell. I could tell about a bit of the cycle or not. If there's a miscarriage, maybe I keep that silent, but I've told them about the treatment. Or there's so many different dynamics. It's difficult. It's difficult to know what I can't think of any from this study so far and the conversations that we've had with various kind of stakeholders that are involved in both the fertility side and kind of the employment side. I can't really think of anything other than still saying that policies and training for managers try and make it an environment where there is more awareness about fertility treatment, so that managers are aware of what IVF is, for example, the stages that people go through, what it entails. Put information on your website about sources of support. Do maybe a blog. maybe there could be a buddy scheme or like a support group thing that people can, if it's a buddy scheme, you might be able to keep that more anonymous. People, not many other people might know that you're taking part in it, to offer some elements of support whilst people decide can they or can't they tell their manager. You know, and are there provisions for occupational health? Are there provisions through like a counselling that work could be involved? You know, are there other routes to getting some support around this issue other than always telling your manager? Or somebody else? Can you, you know, if you've got a really bad relationship with your manager, can you maybe speak to mental health first aid, or can you maybe speak to HR as a starter? But it is really difficult. It is really difficult because it is putting yourself on the line when you disclose anything like this, that you might not be supported.
Yeah, I think a lot of things. So one of the things that I'm thinking is that I guess on one hand it's like, well, do we need something for every eventuality? So whether that be fertility treatments, grief. I know there are puppy policies for those that are taking on new pets. You could have one for grief or loss. You could have one for, financial challenges. That's another component that is still, as well as mental health. I think that's stigmatized as well. So to come in and say I'm struggling financially, yet you're paying me a salary, and how do I navigate through those things? So, but if you don't have something that lists reasons or why it's okay to come and talk to or to disclose to whoever it is about whatever that situation may be, then it comes back to your point earlier on about legitimacy of being able to do that. Because if there's a list of things that you can talk about and the thing you want to talk about isn't on that list, then it's like, well, can I talk about that thing? I'll talk about that thing. So one of the ways that I've tried to get around it in my organisation is I talk about physical, mental, emotional, and financial well-being are key aspects of what makes workplaces better and helps people enrich their lives in whatever way that may be, and making it really clear that anyone who works for or with me and my organisation, we want to talk about it. I've got like a guidebook thing that says it might be uncomfortable, it might be hard, but they're the conversations that matter. So if you or someone else is struggling with around physical, mental, emotional, financial well-being, please share it at the earliest opportunity. We might not be able to fix it, but if we can help and assist, we will. But we trust that you know your well-being better than anyone else. And so you need to take the actions that you can do to support it. But we also trust that if you're struggling, you'll check in and say, I'm finding whatever this thing is tricky. And not necessarily needing to disclose exactly what it is, but disclosing there's a thing that's happening and that thing is tough and I could do with X.
Yeah, I think that's it.
I'm not guaranteeing that we can give you X, but if you let me know what you can do with, then we can talk about what it might be, so that in terms of how we can help.
Yeah, I think that is a really nice approach, because it's almost asking for the solution that person thinks will be useful for them. It doesn't matter, I suppose, to an extent. I think you've got to be careful that, obviously there are protected characteristics under the Equality Act, so if somebody has got a disability or if they've got maternity, there might be particular things that you have to do. But I love this idea that, we've not got a master list, it's just in both of our interests, so we want to support you, and we appreciate that if we can support you in a way that enables you to still be productive, then it's in the business interest as well, which I think maybe helps with legitimacy as well. If people realise that if I'm asking for support to make me able to do my job, and it might not even be, if I'm needing a bit of a workload relief right now in order to sustain my productivity, to stop me spiralling down. Some people could end up in some sort of crisis if they're not supported. So it's like an investment in the future for the employee, but for the business as well. I think there's the business case argument behind supporting people probably works on people as well, in terms of feeling, if I do ask for a bit of support now and I go with a solution, that I think might work. I'm not being cheeky, and if it is something that's communicated to if everybody knows of those 4 principles, or however many it was, your emotional, your physical, your financial, then it doesn't mean that I'm this odd case, I'm this special person needing something special. It's well, no, this is a philosophy that we do for everybody, and it becomes a psychologically safe culture, where people feel more able to talk. I saw something recently, and I've not read the book yet because I don't think it's out yet, but there's a book called The Whole Person Workplace, and I think that's really nice because that kind of chimes with that you are a whole person at work. You're not just this ideal worker who's just the only thing they've got in their life is just the job, and they're unencumbered by anything else, and they can just be productive all the time. But this idea that you are a whole person, you bring that whole person to work, and if your workplace respects everybody as whole people, then maybe everyone is happier and more productive.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely put a link to it in the show notes, even if it's a pre-order. Even if it's a pre-order link.
Yeah, I'll send it.
Put a link into that. Thank you. That'd be really good. Okay. I think I want to bring us together and close us off, Krystal, if that's okay. Before I do, is there something else that you might be thinking, something else that you're feeling, or something else that you want to say before I do?
I think just in all of the stuff that I'm researching, there's a lot of the time the focus is on the line manager, of how the skills that the line manager needs to support somebody, and I think there's a lot of pressure on the line manager, and quite often they've not had the training necessarily, but more than that their job roles in terms of their pressures to hit targets, the amount of finances that they have. Line managers can often want to be really rhythm intelligent managers or be supportive managers or whatever, but if they've not got the infrastructure behind them to allow them to do that, it can be really difficult. So it's not just about them being trained. They definitely absolutely need training on all of this stuff. They need to know what the policies are, what the legislation is around this, what they can and can't do. They need awareness of some of these non-work issues that people might be going through. But also they need to be encouraged to do that themselves. So are they being rewarded? Are your managers rewarded for being good managers? They need to have the budget to do it, so that if they're going to, say somebody doesn't have to hit the targets for this time because we're going to take a bit of your work off you, we're going to take a bit of your hours off you, or we're going to give you some special leave or whatever it is. Who picks up that work? If you're not pushing it on to other people, who then quite often the single people without the children, if they're going to, they can't do it themselves, the managers, so if they've not been budget for an extra headcount or the okay to say that certain targets can be dispensed with or postponed or whatever, you're quite often asking a very, very lot of your line managers, and I think their well-being and their emotions, if we're exposing them to things like trauma and mental health problems and very upsetting fertility journeys potentially, and all manner of other things, grief, they need support as well. And I think we quite often, I feel as well, like as academics, we can write papers and we can make observations about what people need, but in the real world there can be other factors that are at play there, and I think we can't always ask line managers or expect line managers to be able to handle this very well if they're not supported as well. That was it. That was all I wanted to say there, really.
Oh, that was good. Thank you. Okay. So we've mentioned a book, and we've mentioned a few different research papers on rhythm intelligence and some of the research that you've done as well. Are there any other kind of books or videos or research papers or articles that you would recommend for people to have a look at?
No. Not off the top of my head, no. I think I've mentioned most of the.
Yeah, that's fine. So if something comes to mind, then let me either include them in the links that you email across, or or let me know at a later date, and we can always update the show notes afterwards as well.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's all right.
I had prepared for that question and I wrote a few, but we've mentioned all of them. So.
No, that's good. That's all good. Well, that means if we've mentioned them all, that means that we've included all the really important stuff. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Is there anyone or someone in particular that you would recommend that we seek out to get as a guest on this podcast?
Well, we had this chat in the briefing, didn't it? I would have absolutely said Sarah Jane Lenny, but
yes,
I believe
we've already had. We've had her on for episode 2. Yeah. We can certainly work to get her back on. Yep.
Yeah, I mean Scott Bason. I can't even say his. I've never met him. I've just seen him online. Scott, it's Behson. Bason. He's the guy that's written the whole person workplace that I can't wait to read. So he might have more to say on that. And that Caroline Gattrell's done loads on maternity management and silence and not being able to talk about things in the workplace around from the perspective of working mothers and pregnant women. I could go on a list of all the people that I know that have done anything on emotions.
Yeah, no,
there's a colleague of mine at MMU who's done a research project on blame in the workplace. The whole emotion of blame. But I was going to email him between speaking to you and today, but he doesn't work on Fridays and Mondays, so I didn't bother. Okay.
Well, so please, yeah. So that would be really interesting.
Yeah. So he's Professor Ben Lupton, and he had a senior research assistant as well on it, who one of those two.
Okay. All right. We can do that. All right, and if people wanted to find out more about your research then, what would be a good way to get hold of you if they wanted to ask you something more?
So Twitter or LinkedIn, or we do have a project web page for the fertility study, which has got some interesting stuff on there actually. We're doing something called ethnodrama, which is we've got a creative consultant who has we've given her the key themes from our research, but we've also given her some of the raw data, and we're doing like little scenes, like little vignettes
nice.
for use in training materials and stuff. So there's a couple of them. We've got a couple of those as audios on our website as well.
Okay, well I'll put links to all 3 of those then into the show notes as well.
Fantastic.
All that's left then is to say, Crystal, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed both finding out all about your research and some of the wider literature as well. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really, really cool. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Emotion at Work podcast, and if you got this far, you must be interested in the role that emotions have in the workplace, either within individuals, between people in teams, or in organisations as a whole. So head over to the Emotion at Work hub, which you can find at community.emotionatwork.co.uk. Thanks for listening.